Hello everyone, and welcome to part 6 of Communication Skills Training Lectures. Today we are going to talk about domestic violence and rape. Domestic violence is defined as any abusive behavior in any relationship that is used by one partner to gain or maintain power and control over another intimate partner. 1 in 4 women will at least experience domestic violence once in their lifetime. Greatest age range at risk is from 20 to 24 years old. 7% of men report being physically assaulted by their partner. Anybody can experience domestic violence as it occurs in every race, religion, socioeconomic status level, and sexual orientation. Types of domestic violence include physical domestic violence, psychological domestic violence, emotional domestic violence, and economical domestic violence. Physical domestic violence is the most commonly thought of form of domestic violence. Physical domestic violence is when there is any form of physical abuse such as hitting, slapping, shoving, grabbing, pinching, biting, and hair pulling. Physical domestic violence also includes denying a partner medical care or forcing a partner to use alcohol or other harmful substances. Psychological domestic violence. Elements of psychological abuse include causing fear by intimidation, threatening physical harm to self, partner, children, or partner's family or friends or pets, destruction of property, and forcing isolation from family, friends, or school and work. Emotional domestic violence. Undermining an individual's sense of self-worth and/or self-esteem is abusive. This may include, but is not limited to, constant criticism, diminishing one's abilities, name-calling, or damaging one's relationship with his or her children. Economical domestic violence is making or attempting to make an individual financially dependent by maintaining total control over financial resources, withholding one's access to money, or forbidding one's attendance at school or employment. This is a very commonly asked question. Why would they stay? For some, it can be really hard to understand why a person would ever stay in an abusive relationship. Relationships in general are very confusing and provide many obstacles. Being in an abusive relationship can be very scary. For some, fear makes the victim feel like things would be worse if they left. For some, the victim does not view their relationship as abusive due to the love they have for the person, and they focus on the times in which abuse is not present. Dependence can play a major role in staying in an abusive relationship due to fear of not being able to support themselves on their own, and even fears of being alone in isolation. Religious or personal beliefs may prohibit them from getting a divorce, and they can identify the abuse as part of the for the better or for worse. If they have kids, it could complicate things even more by trying to figure out what is best for them. The abuser might threaten to harm the kids, or if the kids are unaware of the violence, the victim might fear like they are the bad guy for breaking up the marriage. One of the biggest factors that lead to victims staying in abusive relationships is due to a previously known cycle. If the victim was in a previously abusive relationship or grew up in a home with domestic violence, they are more likely to stay in their currently abusive relationship due to feeling like this is just the way things are. The abuser. The abuser can come in many forms, but often has similar characteristics. The abuser most likely has low self-esteem, which can often be masked by acting the opposite. They might have a case of dual personality in which they're not being aggressive or violent. They can come off as sweet, romantic, or even caring. They usually have issues with trust, which can come off as being jealous, and have fears of being abandoned, which may stem from previous experiences. The abuser might have depression or high levels of anxiety, which might include feeling of guilt and/or shame. The abuser often feels very needy and wants everything to go their way. The abuser's behaviors stem from a desire to control and manipulate their partner based on a deep fear of abandonment. Abusers often grew up in abusive homes. The cycle continues as they become an abuser themselves. The abuser never matured emotionally and therefore lacks impulse control, empathy, or understanding of consequences for their actions. Rape and sexual assault. Rape, as defined by the FBI, is the act of penetration, no matter how slightly, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object, or oral penetration by sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. Sexual assault is any type of sexual contact or behavior that occurs without the explicit consent of the recipient. In this slide, we will cover the nation's statistics on sexual violence. 1 in 6 women will experience an attempted or completed rape in her lifetime. 1 in 33 men will experience an attempted or completed rape in his lifetime. Every 2 minutes, a female in the United States is sexually assaulted. 15% of sexual assault victims are under the age of 12. 4 out of 5 rapes are committed by someone known to the victim. Types of rape and sexual assault. Stranger rape is when someone is raped by somebody that they do not know. A blitz sexual assault is when the perpetrator quickly and brutally assaults the victim with no prior contact, usually in a public place. Home invasion sexual assault is when a stranger breaks into the victim's home to commit the assault. Contact sexual assault is when the perpetrator contacts the victim and tries to gain their trust in order to get them to a location where the sexual assault can occur. Acquaintance date. The term date rape is sometimes used to refer to acquaintance rape. Perpetrators of acquaintance rape might be a date, but they could also be a classmate, a neighbor, or someone else known to the victim. It's important to note that a previous act of intimacy does not give consent for increased or continued sexual contact. This is the most common type of sexual assault. Statutory. Statutory rape is when an adult has sex with a person who is under the age of consent. The age of consent can vary from state to state. Although the underage person might verbally say they consent, if they fall below the age consent, it means that they are not viewed as mature enough to fully understand the risks and consequences of sex. Child. A child molester is any older child or adult who touches a child for his or her own sexual gratification. Child molestation is the act of sexually touching a child. Only about 38% of child victims disclose the fact that they have been sexually abused. Incest. Sexual relations between people who are classed as being too closely related to marry each other, or the crime of having sexual intercourse with a parent, child, sibling, or grandchild. Incest is the most underreported of all sexual crimes. Marital or intimate partner. Any unwanted sexual acts by a spouse, ex-spouse, or intimate partner committed without consent and or against the person's will, obtained by force or threat of force, intimidation, or when a person is unable to consent. Those who are already being physically assaulted by a partner are more likely to also be sexually assaulted by their partner. The survivor of sexual assault. Once a person becomes a survivor of sexual abuse, they may go through a variety of changes. There is often a level of shock or denial associated with being a victim. The victim might go through some mood swings, have increased anger, fear, jumpiness, have a lack of affect, feel dirty or degraded, have changes in their eating and or sleeping patterns, and have increase in nightmares. The consequences of sexual assault on the survivor can affect the person greatly. Socially, the person might have trouble trusting others, especially people with similar traits of the attacker. They might have increased levels of anger or break down into tears more easily. Psychologically, the person might enter a depression or experience panic attacks and or have increased paranoia. Sexual pain or fear might become associated with all sexual activity. They might have difficulty relaxing during sex or no longer be able to experience pleasure with sex. On the other hand, some might desire to have increased amounts of sex and desire it all the time. Physically, the victim may have been exposed to some genital problems or sexually transmitted diseases or infections. Those who become pregnant from sexual assault will have even more issues to deal with. Skills. Why didn't you leave the first time they hit you? Those who have never been abused often wonder why the victim did not just leave the first time the violence occurred. But it's more complicated than it appears. The reasons for staying often evolve as circumstances change. Abusive partners often blame their actions on the victims. This chips away at their self-esteem and their grasp of the reality of the situation. Hearing this reassures them that they are worthy of what you should say instead is, you didn't deserve what happened to you, no matter what. And hearing this reassures them that they are worthy of love and respect despite what the abuser did or said. What did you do to make them hit you? This comment often shifts the blame to the victim, not the abuser. It is difficult to wrap our minds around the reality of domestic abuse. It is deliberate and intentional. Abusers are fully aware of their actions and the effect it is having on the victims. It is much easier to blame the victim, to accept that their actions provoke the abuser. With the blame they already carry, this comment can do more than good. It causes the victim to continue the narrative of self-blame and guilt. In relating to a domestic abuse survivor, it is important to remember that abuse is about control, not anger. So what you should say instead is, it's not your fault. It's time to stop dwelling on it. Is one of the most frustrating and upsetting suggestions to say to a survivor is to get over it, because the consequences of abuse do not just end when you leave the abuser. Speaking up about abuse is not about wanting pity or sympathy. It is an essential part to healing. What you should say instead is, any loss can trigger grief, and that's okay. Even the loss of an abusive relationship. You mustn't make the survivor feel that there is something wrong with grieving. Do not criticize them for the conflicting emotions that they are going through. Please follow this link to take the quiz for this lecture, and thank you for watching.